All right, today we're taking a look at Chapter 3, The Torrance Tornado. This starts on page 20, and you might remember that last time in Chapter 2, Louis is just starting to take off as a runner. He's beating some of the college kids. He's really fast, and this is a way that he's kind of getting back on the right track. So here we go with Chapter 3. Please follow along while I read. It happened every Saturday. Louis would go to the track, limber up, lie on his stomach on the infield grass, visualizing his coming race, then walk to the line, await the pop of the gun, and spring away. Pete would dash back and forth in the infield, clicking his stopwatch, yelling encouragement and instructions. When Pete gave the signal, Louis would stretch out his long legs and his opponents would scatter and drop away. In the words of a reporter, sadly disheartened and disillusioned. Meaning they just realized that they really don't stand a chance against Louis. Louis would glide over the line, Pete would be there to tackle him, and the kids in the bleachers would cheer and stomp. Then there would be autograph-seeking girls coming in waves, a ride home, kisses from mother, and snapshots on the front lawn, trophy in hand. Louis won so many wristwatches, the traditional laurel of track. Laurel is the award you get for winning, that he began handing them out all over town. Periodically, a new golden boy would be touted as the one who would take him down, so people would think every once in a while that someone else was going to be able to beat Louis, only to be run off his feet. One victim, wrote a reporter, had been hailed as the boy who doesn't know how fast he can run. He found out Saturday. Louis' supreme high school moment came in the 1934 Southern California Track and Field Championship. Running in what was celebrated as the best field of high school milers in history, Louis routed them all and smoked the mile in 4:21:3, shattering the national high school record set during World War I by more than 2 seconds. His main rival so exhausted himself chasing Louis that he had to be carried from the track. As Louis trotted into Pete's arms, he felt a tug of regret. He felt too fresh. Had he run his second lap faster, he said, he might have clocked 4:18. A reporter predicted that Louis' record would stand for 20 years. It stood for 19. You can see there's a picture of Pete and Louis during all this up at the top. Once his hometown's resident arch-villain, so he was the bad guy in town, Louis was now a superstar, and Torrance forgave him everything. When he trained, people lined the track fence calling out, "Come on, Iron Man!" The sports pages of the Los Angeles Times and the Examiner were striped with stories on the prodigy. Prodigy is a child who does something outstanding, whom the Times called the Torrance Tempest, and practically everyone else called the Torrance Tornado. By one report, stories on Louis were such an important source of revenue to the Torrance Herald that the newspaper insured his legs for $50,000. Torrancers carpooled to his races and crammed the grandstands. Embarrassed by the fuss, Louis asked his parents not to watch him race. Louise came anyway, sneaking to the track to peer through the fence, but the races made her so nervous that she had to hide her eyes. Not long ago, Louis' aspirations had ended at whose kitchen he might burgle. Now he latched onto a wildly audacious goal, the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. Berlin's in Germany. The games had no mile race, so milers ran the 1,500 meters, about 120 yards short of a mile. It was a seasoned man's game. Most top milers of the era peaked in their mid-20s or later. As of 1934, the Olympic 1,500-meter favorite was Glenn Cunningham, who'd set the world record in the mile, 4:06:8, just weeks after Louis set the national high school record. So keep in mind here that Louis is really pretty close to this record, especially for being a high schooler who had never run until really recently. So he's got a lot of natural ability in town. Cunningham had been racing since the 4th grade, and at the 1936 games, he would be just short of 27. He wouldn't run his fastest mile until he was 28. As of 1936, Louis would have only 5 years' experience and would be only 19. But Louis was already the fastest high school miler in American history, and he was improving so rapidly that he had lopped 42 seconds off his time in 2 years. His record mile, run when he was 17, was 3.5 seconds faster than Cunningham's fastest high school mile, run when he was 20. and it tells you down here that Cunningham didn't start high school until he was 18 because of the burn injury he had that we read about in chapter 2. Even conservative track pundits were beginning to think that Louis might be the one to shatter precedent. And after Louis won every race in his senior season, their confidence was strengthened. Louis believed he could do it, and so did Pete. Louis wanted to run in Berlin more than he had ever wanted anything. In December 1935, Louis graduated from high school. A few weeks later, he ran in 1936 with his thoughts full of Berlin. The Olympic track finals would be held in New York in July, and the Olympic Committee would base its selection of competitors on a series of qualifying races. Louis had 7 months to run himself onto the team. In the meantime, he also had to figure out what to do about the numerous college scholarships being offered to him. Pete had won a scholarship to the University of Southern California, where he had become one of the nation's top 10 college milers. He urged Louis to accept USC's offer, but delay entry until the fall so he could train full-time. So Louis moved into Pete's frat house and, with Pete coaching him, trained obsessively. All day, every day, he lived and breathed the 1,500 meters in Berlin. In the spring, he began to realize he wasn't going to make it. Though he was getting faster by the day, he couldn't force his body to improve quickly enough to catch his older rivals by summer. He was simply too young. He was heartbroken. In May, Louis was leafing through a newspaper when he saw a story on the Compton Open, a prestigious track meet to be held at the Los Angeles Coliseum on May 22nd. The headliner in the 5,000 meters, 3 miles and 188 yards, was Norman Bright, a 26-year-old schoolteacher. Bright had set the American 2-mile record in 1935 and was America's second fastest 5,000-meter man behind the legendary Don Lash, Indiana University's 23-year-old record-smashing machine. America would send 3 5,000-meter men to Berlin, and Lash and Bright were considered locks. Pete urged Louis to enter the Compton Open and try his legs at a longer distance. If you stay with Norman Bright, he told Louis, you make the Olympic team. The idea was a stretch. The mile was 4 laps of the track. The 5,000 was more than 12. What Louis would describe as a 15-minute torture chamber, well over 3 times his optimal distance. He had only twice raced beyond a mile, and the 5,000, like the mile, was dominated by much older men. He had only 2 weeks to train for Compton, and with the Olympic trials in July, 2 months to become America's youngest elite 5,000-meter man. But he had nothing to lose. He trained so hard that he rubbed the skin right off one of his toes, leaving his sock bloody. The race, contested before 10,000 fans, was a barn burner. And a barn burner, I had to look it up, it means something's really exciting because there also were, well, there was this story about burning barns to get rid of rats, and it would create excitement, and it led to this political party name, and in any case now, something being a barn burner means it's really exciting, everyone wants to watch what's going to happen, how it's going to end. Continuing. Louis and Bright took off together, leaving the field far behind. Each time one took the lead, the other one would gun past him again, and the crowd would roar. They turned into the home stretch for the last time, dead together, Bright inside, Louis outside. Ahead, a runner named John Casey was on the verge of being lapped. Officials waved at Casey, who tried to yield, but Bright and Louis came to him before he could get out of the way. Bright squeezed through on the inside, but Louis had to shift right to go around Casey. Confused, Casey veered farther right, carrying Louis out. Louis sped up to go around him, but Casey sped up also, carrying Louis most of the way toward the grandstand. Finally, Louis took a half step to cut inside, lost his balance, and dropped one hand to the ground. Bright now had an advantage that looked to Pete's eye to be several yards. Louis took off after him, gaining rapidly. With the crowd on its feet and screaming, Louis caught Bright at the tape. He was a beat too late. Bright won by a glimmer. He and Louis had clipped out the fastest 5,000 run in America in 1936. Louis's Olympic dream was on again. On June 13th, Louis made quick work of another Olympic 5,000 qualifier, but the toe injured in training opened up again. He was too lame to train for his final qualifying race, and it cost him. Bright beat Louis by 4 yards, but Louis wasn't disgraced, clocking the 3rd fastest 5,000 run in America since 1931. And remember, he only started training for this a few weeks before he ran it. He was invited to the final of the Olympic trials. On the night of July 3rd, 1936, the residents of Torrance gathered to see Louis off to New York. They presented him with a wallet bulging with traveling money, a train ticket, new clothes, a shaving kit, and a suitcase emblazoned with the words Torrance Tornado. Fearing that the suitcase made him look brash, Louis carried it out of view and covered the nickname with adhesive tape, then boarded his train. And you can see that the suitcase is down here, which is really cool considering how much the town all hated Louis. He was really a problem for them, and now they're the ones supporting him, giving him money for his travels as he goes to the Olympics. According to his diary, he spent the journey introducing himself to every pretty girl he saw, including a total of 5 between Chicago and Ohio. When the train doors slid open in New York, Louis felt as if he were walking into an inferno. An inferno is like a fiery hell. It was the hottest summer on record in America, and New York was one of the hardest hit cities. In 1936, air conditioning was a rarity, found only in a few theaters and department stores, so escape was nearly impossible. That week, which included the hottest 3-day period in the nation's history, the heat would kill 3,000 Americans. In Manhattan, where it would reach 106 degrees, 40 people would die. And if you've ever been to New York when it's hot out, it's really humid and sticky. It's terrible. So it's not just hot, but it's also muggy. Louis and Norman Bright split the cost of a room at the Lincoln Hotel. Like all of the athletes, in spite of the heat, they had to train, sweating profusely day and night, training in the sun, unable to sleep in stifling hotel rooms and YMCAs, lacking any appetite. Virtually every athlete lost a huge amount of weight. By one estimate, no athlete dropped less than 10 pounds. One was so desperate for relief that he moved into an air-conditioned theater, buying tickets to movies and sleeping through every showing. Louis was as miserable as everyone else. Chronically dehydrated, he drank as much as he could. After an 880-meter run in 106-degree heat, he downed 8 orangeades and a quart of beer. That could not have felt good. Each night, taking advantage of the cooler air, he walked 6 miles. His weight fell precipitously. The pre-race newspaper coverage riled him. Don Lash was considered unbeatable, having just taken the NCAA 5,000-meter title for the 3rd time, set a world record at 2 miles and an American record at 10,000 meters, and repeatedly thumped Bright, once by 150 yards. Bright was pegged for 2nd, a series of other athletes for 3rd through 5th. Louis wasn't mentioned. Like everyone else, Louis was daunted by Lash, but the first 3 runners would go to Berlin, and he believed he could be among them. "If I have any strength left from the heat," he wrote to Pete, "I'll beat Bright and give Lash the scare of his life." On the night before the race, Louis lay sleepless in his sweltering hotel room. He was thinking about all the people who would be disappointed if he failed. The next morning, Louis and Bright left the hotel together. The trials were to be held at a new stadium on Randall's Island, in the confluence of the East and Harlem rivers. Confluence is where the rivers meet. It was a hair short of 90 in the city, but when they got off the ferry, they found the stadium much hotter, probably far over 100 degrees. All over the track, athletes were keeling over and being carted off to hospitals. Louis sat waiting for his race, baking under a scalding sun that, he said, made a wreck of me. At last, they were told to line up. The gun cracked, the men rushed forward, and the race was on. Lash bounded to the lead with Bright in close pursuit. Louis dropped back, and the field settled in for the grind. On the other side of the continent, a throng of Torrancers crouched around the radio in the Zamparinis' house. They were in agonies. They're stressed, they're worried. The start time for Louis' race had passed, but the NBC radio announcer was lingering on the swimming trials. Pete was so frustrated that he considered putting his foot through the radio. At last, the announcer listed the positions of the 5,000-meter runners, but didn't mention Louis. Unable to bear the tension, Louise fled to the kitchen out of earshot. Note this, that Louise gets really stressed for Louis anytime something serious is going on. That will come up later again in our book. The runners pushed through laps 7, 8, 9. Lash and Bright led the field. Louis hovered in the middle of the pack, waiting to make his move. The heat was suffocating. One runner dropped, and the others had no choice but to hurdle him. Then another went down, and they jumped him too. Louis could feel his feet cooking. The spikes on his shoes were conducting heat up from the track. He has track spikes on to grip to the ground. Norman Bright's feet were burning particularly badly. In terrible pain, he took a staggering step off the track, twisted his ankle, then lurched back on. The stumble seemed to finish him. He lost touch with Lash. When Louis and the rest of the pack came up to him, he had no resistance to offer. Still, he ran on. As the runners entered the final lap, Lash gave himself a breather, dropping just behind his Indiana teammate, Tom Deckard. Well behind him, Louis was ready to move. Angling into the backstretch, he accelerated. Lash's back drew closer, and then it was just a yard or two ahead. Looking at the bobbing head of the mighty Don Lash, Louis felt intimidated. For several strides, he hesitated. Then he saw the last curve ahead, and the sight slapped him awake. He opened up as fast as he could go. Banking around the turn, Louis drew alongside Lash just as Lash shifted right to pass Deckard. Louis was carried 3 wide, losing precious ground. Leaving Deckard behind, Louis and Lash ran side by side into the home stretch. With 100 yards to go, neither man had any more speed to give. With heads thrown back, legs pumping out of sync, Louis and Lash drove for the tape. With just a few yards remaining, Lash began inching up, drawing even. The 2 runners, legs rubbery with exhaustion, flung themselves past the judges in a finish so close, Louis later said, "You couldn't put a hair between us." Here's a picture of them getting to the finish line. The announcer's voice echoed across the living room in Torrance. "Zamperini," he said, "had won." Standing in the kitchen, Louise heard the crowd in the next room suddenly shout. Outside, car horns honked, the front door swung open, and neighbors gushed into the house. As a crush of hysterical Torrancers celebrated around her, Louise wept happy tears. Anthony popped the cork on a bottle of wine and began filling glasses and singing out toasts. Smiling, said one reveler, like a jackass eating cactus. A moment later, Louis' voice came over the airwaves, calling a greeting to Torrance. But the announcer was mistaken. The judges ruled that it was Lash, not Zamperini, who had won. Deckard had hung on for third. The announcer soon corrected himself, but it hardly dimmed the celebration in Torrance. The hometown boy had made the Olympic team. A few minutes after the race, Louis stood under a cold shower. He could feel the sting of the burns on his feet, following the pattern of his cleats. After drying off, he weighed himself. He had sweated off 3 pounds. He looked in the mirror and saw a ghostly image looking back at him. Across the room, Norman Bright was slumped on a bench with one ankle propped over the other knee, staring at his foot. It, like the other one, was burned so badly that the skin had detached from the sole. He had finished 5th, 2 places short of the Olympic team. By the day's end, Louis had received some 125 telegrams. "Torrance has gone nuts," read one. "Village has gone screwy," read another. There was even one from the Torrance Police Department, which must have been relieved that someone else was chasing Louis. That night, Louis pored over the evening papers, which showed photos of the finish of his race. In some, he seemed to be tied with Lash. In others, he seemed to be in front. On the track, he felt sure that he had won. The first 3 would go to the Olympics, but Louis felt cheated nonetheless. As Louis studied the papers, the judges were reviewing photographs and a film of the 5,000. Later, Louis sent home a telegram with the news. Judges called it a tie. Leave noon Wednesday for Berlin. Will run harder in Berlin. When Sylvia returned from work the next day, remember that's Louis' sister, the house was packed with well-wishers and newsmen. Louis' 12-year-old sister Virginia clutched one of Louis' trophies and told reporters of her plans to be the next great Zamperini runner. Anthony headed off to the Kiwanis Club, where he and Louis' Boy Scout master would drink toasts to Louis until 4 in the morning. Pete walked around town to backslaps and congratulations. "Am I ever happy," he wrote to Louis. "I have to go around with my shirt open so that I have enough room for my chest." Louis Zamperini was on his way to Germany to compete in the Olympics in an event that he had only contested 4 times. He was the youngest distance runner to ever make the team. And on that note, we will pause and we will read next about Louis heading to the Olympics in Berlin.